In honor of Mental Health Awareness Month, I'm going to be sharing with you a story in hopes of giving you courage when it may be time to move on from your toxic job. So the saying, "it's business, not personal," is often said as a harsh way to dismiss one's emotions. Humans respond to different life circumstances with emotional responses that involves one's mental health. And working a job does not prevent people from experiencing problems outside of the job. Therefore, when push comes to shove, you must look after yourself. Most forms of management at these ever temporary jobs will not tell you when you should take time off for yourself because you appear to be burnt out. Most of the time, they will act heartless and cold when you are in need of some mercy and understanding. My first toxic workplace story that I told on my channel is linked here. Unfortunately, I have ran into my fair share of working with some of the worst people. Get your snacks and popcorn ready. Here we go. I once worked for a company where I had a supervisor who told me, even if it unalives you, you need to get this work done and strive beyond the limit. This coming from the very woman who told me at the beginning of this job, "we're like a big old family here." She even went so far as to remove one of my midday breaks after seeing how productive I worked. I originally had one lunch and two 15s. It was wonderful. I was able to be productive because I had a 15 before my lunch and a 15 after, and she figured, well, if you're working that hard, let me just go ahead and chop one of your breaks so that you can get more orders processed. Anyway, although this full-time job itself was a good job, my supervisor eventually made it extremely toxic and unbearable. She would reward my coworker who would work through her lunch by giving them permission to go home early. My supervisor would threaten my job by trying to guilt trip me into coming in an hour early to finish leftover work from the day prior. When I told her that I would be clocking in, she conveniently decided to change her mind. Meanwhile, during the start of the pandemic, I had been experiencing some difficulties outside of work. The root of these difficulties stemmed from the toxic workplace environment that I had just gotten fired from, on top of the uncertainty of 2020. Unfortunately, I wasn't yet healed from the toxic workplace abuse that I had just left. Those difficulties started to bleed over into my work, and it was as if I was experiencing PTSD. Therefore, I asked if I could work remotely due to the personal issues that were affecting my health. My supervisor and the HR manager's response was no, and they told me others have it much worse than you. HR had the nerve to lecture me for about an hour on how someone else in the company had a physically ill spouse, along with another person who didn't even work for our company, about how they were fighting leukemia and COVID. HR concluded this lecture by telling me, just go ahead and take the day off and just get on some antidepressants. I promise you, I cannot make this up. She even told me to call her once I made the doctor's appointment to do so. Furthermore, HR told me, if you work from home, all you're going to be doing is sitting in your room crying. You might as well come to work. I felt so misunderstood, dismissed, and defeated because my issues couldn't be seen, nor did they even matter to them. She even went the extra mile by texting me and leaving me a voicemail to remind me to get those meds, as if she was a certified and licensed doctor who was able to instantly diagnose. She, amongst others at this job, loved talking about helping out at their little local churches, but were so quick to gossip and treat certain people, like myself, coldly, or as if I was a piece of office furniture or a fixture mounted to the wall. As I continued to come to work, I started to suffer from panic attacks, crying spells in the bathroom, a lack of appetite, digestive issues, and so forth. These negative emotions would surge up in my body when my supervisor would walk into my office and literally just stand and stare at me. I would be on the phone or entering in data in the computer, and my supervisor would just literally stand there, quietly and creepily looking at me. Perhaps she was jealous or trying to intimidate me. I will never know. Meanwhile, I decided to use my PTO to regroup. How about my supervisor called me every single day of my paid time off? Me, not knowing as much as I know now, answered and returned all of her unrelenting phone calls up until the day that I returned back to work. However, once back at work, she informed me by saying, "Do not ever ignore any of my phone calls ever again." I wish she would say the same thing now, because I promise you, post-pandemic Ashley could never. Okay. Once George Floyd made the news on top of the pandemic, my supervisor came to work and shared her racially motivated remarks, culturally insensitive discriminatory views, and even race-related insults. Let's just say she referred to one race of people as a mammal that starts with the letter M and has a tail. I was the only Black woman that worked at this location. I sat in silence, feeling completely disrespected as I anguishedly listened to her vile, toxic, and ugly statements. It was simply awful. Then she, looking as if, "Oop, I done said too much," she says, "Because I'm friends with the Black person I used to work with in a different state, I can say these things." She would always do this thing where she cleared her throat. Ooh. The pandemic forced many workers at that company, including myself, to work from home. It was a blessing in disguise. My metrics drastically increased, and my mental health was steadily improving. However, while working from home, I still managed to catch some hateration. A guy from my office called me, stating that I needed to quit calling the office so much because one of the respiratory therapists were getting annoyed by all of the phone calls coming in. I asked him what did he mean by that, because I never made direct calls to the office while working from home. He stated, "Yeah, I know, but some adults here act like kids, so just make sure you call me directly instead of calling in the office because they are getting tired of answering the heavy influx of calls." Therefore, the IT that was acting like a child randomly chose to blame me for something completely out of my control, when I simply was minding my own business, working from home, doing my outbound patient calls. Crazy? Yes. And the cuckoo crazy part about all of this was, before I started working from home, I had introduced this idea where the company would save time and money by implementing this phone system where patients would call in, be able to select the department that they wanted to speak to, and it would directly transfer them over, instead of my very small department having to catch all the inbound calls and having to transfer these calls to several different departments outbound, which subtracted from our time and productivity of getting our work completed. So surprisingly, my supervisor ran it by the company president, and the company president told me no, because she said it would cost the company an extra $8 a month. At this point, I was just done with all of them. I was done with the shenanigans, the junk. It was getting to the point to where it was just like, this is ridiculous. About 1 month and some change later, the company prematurely decided to assign some of us to come back to that dreaded office environment. And guess what, y'all? I was amongst one of those who was doomed to come back. Those awful symptoms that I was healing from, they started to make a comeback too. I was dealing with anxiety, acid reflux, headaches, sadness, depression, etc. Then things took a turn when my office computer was struck by lightning one weekend while away from work. Therefore, I had to switch offices. The straw that broke the camel's back was when my manager slammed a large stack of order forms on my desk, just bam, slammed them like that, and said, "These need to be manually entered into the computer one by one." She claimed, after all the work that I've been doing, placing orders, answering phone calls, calling doctor's office, returning doctor's calls, placing prescriptions for clients, answering clients who would come to our office physically, going out to their car, getting their supplies, getting new supplies, refilling the supplies bins. I just can't think of everything, but I was doing a lot, okay? And she claimed that I needed more things to do, followed by a little haughty laugh. She was just living her best life. I literally felt like my head was going to explode, and I thought I was going to pass out on the floor. I told my mom what happened, and she was furious. She told me, "Get your stuff, come that Friday, get out of there." My mom also instructed me to tell my supervisor that she was the reason I was leaving, so that I would not be carrying mental trash home. I did exactly that. Sometimes outside forces are needed to snap us back to ourselves. When that Friday rolled around, I arrived to work 1 hour early, grabbed all my office stuff, loaded my car, and then I went and sat in my supervisor's office waiting on her to clock in. A good 20 minutes later, my supervisor walks into the office and, startled by my presence, jumps up and says, "Oh, hey girl, I wasn't expecting you to be in here. Are you excited about the weekend?" I was beyond the fluffy small talk. I got right to it. I handed her my office key, signed letter of resignation, and told her I resign effective immediately. She, seemingly shocked, asked, "Well, why?" And I told her, "Because of you." Right after I said that, I got up, walked straight out of there, got into my car, I drove off, and I never looked back. What a lot of people may not understand or be aware of is just because you leave a toxic job and enter into a new one does not mean that negative emotions and feelings immediately disappear. You may very well continue to experience the residual effects of prior workplace abuse. In some cases, getting a new job can add to your detriment by exacerbating your negative mental health symptoms or potentially causing you greater damage mentally and or physically. At times, leaving a job doesn't always happen after giving the perfect 2 weeks notice. Sometimes it requires that you leave a lot sooner when your health is at risk, and management does not have the right to make you stick it out. In order to heal properly, you may have to swallow your pride, ask for help and support, and refuse to defaulting to defense mechanisms such as denial or projection. Realize that you are, was, and will always be worth it. Decide to be patient with yourself as you are now on a healing journey. Healing takes time. Confide in someone you trust, cry it out, spend some time with God, reach out to therapists in your area, join a local support group. You may have to temporarily move back in with family for support if needed. Carve out weekly or daily time to recharge in silence. Meditate, go for a walk, watch Netflix, draw, color, listen to music, set firm boundaries. And remember, the same people that look after themselves will watch you suffer. You matter. Be blessed.